The world's attention on April 15th of the year 2026 is fixed upon the Strait of Hormuz, the single most critical artery for global energy on the planet. In a move that has sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles and commodities markets alike, the United States has managed to create a global spectacle of immense proportions. In less than 36 hours following an executive order from the Oval Office, American naval forces have imposed a tight, unyielding blockade around the ports of Iran. Over 10,000 sailors, Marines, and airmen, supported by more than 10 warships and dozens of combat aircraft, have been deployed to the region. Central Command has proudly declared that no vessel, regardless of its flag or purpose, is permitted to enter or leave Iranian ports without explicit American authorization. The administration in Washington is quite pleased with this so-called swift victory, presenting it as a masterstroke of geopolitical leverage. But we must ask the uncomfortable question that official briefings are eager to ignore. Is this truly a decisive strategic triumph, or is it a reckless and poorly calculated maneuver that is pushing the entire international system toward the most severe energy crisis witnessed in decades? As soon as the blockade tightened its grip on the Strait of Hormuz, the response from Tehran arrived with a tone that was both cold and remarkably firm. The senior leadership of Iran's Central Military Command issued a stark warning that if the United States persists in threatening the security of Iranian commercial vessels and oil tankers, Tehran will not hesitate to move toward blockading the Red Sea and the Gulf of Oman. This is no hollow saber rattling. Although Iran does not possess a direct coastline on the Red Sea, it maintains highly effective and ideologically aligned partners in the region, most notably the forces in Yemen that have repeatedly demonstrated their willingness and capability to disrupt global shipping. Simultaneously, senior commanders within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps have stated with unnerving clarity that they have not yet deployed their full spectrum of capabilities. They have cautioned that should the conflict persist, they will unveil entirely new tactics and technologies that their adversaries cannot even begin to imagine or counter. This is no longer a simple confrontation between two hostile capitals. Europe is scrambling to assemble its own independent coalition to secure the Strait of Hormuz without any American participation, a stunning diplomatic rebuke of Washington's unilateralism. Russia has publicly warned that certain powers may be using diplomatic overtures as a smokescreen to prepare for a far more expansive ground incursion. Even the most formidable symbol of naval supremacy, a nuclear-powered carrier strike group, has been forced to undertake a lengthy detour around the Cape of Good Hope, deliberately avoiding the Red Sea out of concern for asymmetric threats. And amid this swirling maelstrom of international tension, the individual at the center of this storm continues his signature unpredictable style, engaging in public disputes with global spiritual leaders while making statements that leave even longtime political allies quietly shaking their heads. Today, we will deliver a comprehensive and uncompromising analysis. Is this blockade of Hormuz a brilliant strategic maneuver, or the most significant strategic blunder of this term? Why does Iran appear to be growing increasingly resilient, tactically smarter, and strategically superior under pressure? And what tangible consequences will ordinary people around the world ultimately have to bear for this gamble? Let us begin with what the administration is proudly touting as a swift and total victory. Mere days after the collapse of diplomatic efforts in Islamabad, the order was given for a full naval quarantine of all Iranian ports. According to Central Command, the operation was executed with remarkable speed and precision. In less than 36 hours, American forces had effectively sealed off Iran's access to the open sea. Over 10,000 American sailors, Marines, and airmen, backed by more than 10 warships and dozens of combat aircraft, are now patrolling the tense waters of the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Military spokesmen have declared that the blockade is both total and impartial, asserting that no vessel is allowed to enter or leave Iranian ports without prior authorization. On the surface, the imagery is indeed impressive. The narrative from Washington suggests that 90% of Iran's economy which is heavily reliant on maritime trade, has been brought to its knees in record time. Reports indicate that several commercial ships were forced to turn back within the first day alone, and official statements boast that not a single ship has breached the American cordon. However, we must look beyond the headlines and the carefully crafted press releases to examine the reality lurking beneath the surface. First, we must be unequivocally clear about the nature of this action. This is an extraordinarily aggressive maneuver. The United States has essentially declared that it possesses the unilateral right to decide which sovereign nations may engage in maritime commerce and which may not. This is not a traditional sanctions regime conducted through financial channels. This is a physical naval blockade, an act of economic warfare that carries enormous and unpredictable risks. And now, the irony begins to surface. While the administration celebrates this so-called perfect blockade, Iran has responded not with panic, but with a calm and calculated confidence. Tehran has already announced that it will not be paralyzed by this naval action. Why? Because Iran possesses more than 8,000 kilometers of combined land and sea borders. The Iranian Interior Ministry has directed all border provinces to facilitate the import of essential goods through overland routes, effectively neutralizing a significant portion of the blockade's intended impact. In essence, while the United States pours massive military resources into controlling the sea lanes, Iran is simply shifting its logistical networks to land corridors. This is a classic example of strategic flexibility countering brute force. Even more telling is the manner in which this operation is being framed. Officials speak as if cutting off Iran's oil exports will bring the nation to its knees within a matter of weeks. Yet, the long arc of history has repeatedly demonstrated that applying external pressure on Iran through economic means often produces the exact opposite result: greater national unity and a hardened determination to resist. Let us also examine the numbers that are often conveniently ignored in official statements. The Strait of Hormuz is not merely Iran's lifeline, it is the world's lifeline. Nearly 20% of global oil supplies transit this narrow waterway every single day. By attempting to strangle Iran's exports, the United States is also playing a dangerous game with the lifeblood of the global economy. Nations across Asia and Europe depend heavily on the steady flow of energy through Hormuz. So, while victory is declared on paper, the real-world consequences are already beginning to ripple outward in the form of rising tensions, jittery energy futures, and growing international criticism. And we cannot overlook the most embarrassing detail to emerge thus far. Even as naval forces boast about their impenetrable blockade, one of the most powerful strike groups on the planet has chosen not to sail through the Red Sea. Instead, it is taking the long and expensive detour around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa. Why? Because Iran's allies in Yemen have turned the Red Sea into a high-risk zone for even the most advanced naval vessels. If safe passage cannot be guaranteed for an aircraft carrier in the Red Sea, how convincing is the claim of total control over the waters surrounding Iran? This is what we mean by a victory on paper. On the surface, the blockade looks strong. The press releases sound tough, and the numbers of ships and troops appear intimidating. But scratch beneath that thin veneer, and you see a policy that is heavy on military muscle, yet dangerously light on strategic foresight. Iran, by contrast, is demonstrating remarkable composure. Rather than lashing out recklessly, Tehran is preparing alternative routes, maintaining internal cohesion, and reminding the world that it still holds powerful cards, including the ability to disrupt not just Hormuz, but the Red Sea and the Gulf of Oman as well. Already, one thing is becoming abundantly clear. What is being sold as a masterstroke may turn out to be one of the riskiest gambles of this entire era. While the White House was busy celebrating the total blockade, Iran wasted no time in delivering a calculated and chilling response. Tehran made it crystal clear that if the United States continues to threaten Iranian commercial ships and oil tankers, it will not hesitate to shut down two of the world's most vital maritime arteries, the Red Sea and the Gulf of Oman. This is what can be described as the double chokepoint strategy, and it is far more perilous than many in Washington seem willing to acknowledge. Although Iran does not directly border the Red Sea, it does not need to. It has a highly effective partner that already controls one of the most strategic narrow passages in the world, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The forces in Yemen have proven their capability time and again. Their sustained campaign has slashed maritime traffic through the Red Sea by more than half. Shipping conglomerates have been forced to reroute around the southern tip of Africa, adding thousands of miles, weeks of delay, and millions in extra operational costs. Now, with American pressure mounting, these forces stand ready to act once again, this time in direct solidarity with Tehran. But the real warning came from Iran's own military leadership. Senior commanders issued a stern and unambiguous message. The armed forces of the Islamic Republic will not permit any import or export activities to continue in the Persian Gulf, the Sea of Oman, and beyond if their interests are threatened. Even more striking was the statement regarding their strategic reserves. A spokesman for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps declared, "We have not yet used our full capabilities. If the conflict continues, we will reveal tactics and abilities that the enemy cannot even imagine." Let that sentiment sink in for a moment. While the administration boasts about crippling Iran in a day and a half, the military command in Tehran calmly states that what the world has witnessed so far is only a fraction of their true potential. They speak of entirely new combat methods and technologies for which their adversaries have no effective defense. This is not empty propaganda. Iran has already demonstrated sophisticated drone and missile tactics in recent exchanges, and their ability to combine low-cost drones to overwhelm air defenses, followed by precision ballistic strikes, has proven devastatingly effective. We must call it as we see it. While the United States is flexing its conventional naval muscle, Iran is playing a smarter asymmetric game, and so far, Tehran appears far more composed and strategically patient than the man currently occupying the White House. What makes Iran's position even stronger is its internal unity. Unlike what some foreign policy architects had hoped for, there are no significant signs of major domestic unrest. On the contrary, various political and social factions within Iran have rallied behind the central government in the face of external pressure. The contrast could not be starker. While bold declarations are made about destroying naval forces and exhausting missile stockpiles, reality tells a different story. Iranian forces are not only intact, but they claim their strategic reserves are fully replenished and ready for sustained operations. By threatening both the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea axis, Iran is sending a clear message to Washington. You may blockade one choke point, but we possess the ability to disrupt two. And the global economy, which relies so heavily on these waters for oil, liquefied natural gas, and critical trade, will feel the pain far more acutely than Iran itself. How humiliating this situation has become for the architects of the blockade. While the administration loudly demanded that European nations send their navies to the Gulf to support the operation, Europe quietly decided to do something profoundly different. It is building its own independent strategy and pointedly leaving the United States out of the equation. According to reports from several European media outlets, a group of European Union countries is actively pushing for the creation of a new coalition to restore freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. The plan rests on three main pillars: securing supply lines, clearing naval mines, and providing military escorts for commercial vessels. The most striking aspect of this initiative is that it is being designed without American participation. The leadership in Paris has been particularly vocal, insisting that any international mission in the Strait of Hormuz must be perceived as purely defensive and must not include parties viewed as hostile by Iran, specifically naming the United States. The message from the Élysée Palace is unequivocal. If America joins, Iran will never accept the arrangement. This development reveals a deepening rift across the Atlantic. European leaders are no longer willing to automatically follow America's lead, especially under the current administration's second act. The reasons are glaringly obvious: repeated threats to cut support for Eastern European allies, the imposition of new tariffs on European goods, and an unpredictable style have left many European capitals deeply frustrated and searching for strategic autonomy. We see this for what it truly is: a direct rejection of an America First doctrine that has alienated even the closest of partners. The same president who loves to lecture Europe about paying its fair share is now being politely told, "Thank you, but we will handle this without you." The planned European coalition is modeled after previous European Union operations designed to protect shipping. The goal is to restore confidence among shipping companies so they can return to the critical Hormuz route once the immediate conflict subsides. European diplomats have even emphasized that the force will not fall under American command and will coordinate with countries bordering the strait, including Iran and Oman. Think about the implications of that for a moment. Europe is actively planning to work with the very nation the blockade is intended to strangle. This is a clear diplomatic slap in the face. This move also highlights how isolated this policy has become. Even close allies are looking for ways to distance themselves from the maximum pressure campaign. France argues that American involvement would make any agreement impossible with Tehran. Britain worries that sidelining Washington could provoke an angry reaction, while Germany is slowly shedding its post-war reluctance to engage militarily in the region. The broader picture is unmistakable. Aggressive unilateralism is accelerating the fragmentation of the Western alliance. While tough talk continues about making the country great again, these actions are pushing traditional partners to explore independent paths that deliberately bypass Washington. For Iran, this development is strategically beneficial. The more Europe tries to build a neutral or semi-neutral framework, the harder it becomes for the White House to maintain the narrative of total international isolation of Tehran. Iran has already signaled it is willing to engage with such initiatives, provided they respect its sovereignty. What was presented as strong leadership is increasingly looking like strategic overreach. Europe is not just refusing to follow, it is actively building a parallel track that leaves the United States on the sidelines. As tensions escalate, Russia has issued one of its clearest and most direct warnings yet, and it paints a deeply unflattering picture of the current strategy. In interviews and official statements, the Russian Security Council has cautioned that the United States may be using the latest round of diplomatic engagements as nothing more than a smokescreen to prepare for a potential ground invasion of Iran. While Washington talks of peace, it continues to pour thousands of additional troops into the region. According to Russian assessments, there are already more than 50,000 American troops stationed near Iran, including elite units from the Marine Corps, airborne divisions, and special operations forces. The United States also maintains around 500 aircraft at bases across the Middle East, along with more than 20 warships. Russia's message is blunt. If the current negotiations fail, the conflict could escalate dramatically within a matter of weeks. But the sharpest criticism comes from Russian experts closely observing the situation. Prominent scholars have not held back in their analysis published in major Russian media. They have described the decision to impose the naval blockade as a very unwise move that is steadily worsening America's own strategic position. The argument is that every step Washington has taken so far in this conflict has backfired. By attempting to cut off Iran's oil exports, the backbone of its economy, the United States is not only failing to break Tehran, but is also creating massive collateral damage for the entire global economy. Here is where the numbers become truly alarming. Nearly 20% of the world's oil supply flows through the Persian Gulf. If the blockade continues and Iran retaliates by disrupting shipping, global oil prices could surge to unprecedented levels, triggering severe inflation, supply chain chaos, and economic pain for countries from Europe to Asia and the developing world. The critical truth that seems unwilling to be accepted is this. While the blockade will certainly hurt Iran's economy, Iran has the resilience and alternative land routes to survive. The countries that will suffer far more are America's own allies and major oil-importing nations in Asia. Even more damaging is the apparent reliance on flawed or overly optimistic intelligence. There have been repeated claims that Iran's navy has been destroyed and its missile capabilities exhausted. Yet reality shows the opposite. Iran continues to launch more advanced missiles and drones than before, demonstrating both endurance and innovation. The belief that maximum pressure would force Iran to capitulate quickly has instead managed to unite Iranian society behind its leadership, alienate key European allies, and risk turning much of the world against American policy. The more pressure is applied, the stronger Iran's negotiating position becomes over time. Tehran simply has no incentive to accept a deal dictated entirely on terms set by Washington. This is the bitter irony. The man who prides himself on being a master dealmaker is steadily painting himself into a corner. While the world watches the dangerous standoff in the Strait of Hormuz, a bizarre and very public battle has been unfolding on the domestic front, one that reveals deep concerns about leadership and mental stability. In recent weeks, there has been an unprecedented war of words with the current pontiff, the first American to hold the position in history. What began as policy disagreements has escalated into sharp personal attacks, including questioning loyalty and suggesting that the Vatican is undermining national interests in the Middle East. In return, the spiritual leader has criticized aggressive foreign policy, warning that military escalation and economic blockades risk causing immense suffering to innocent civilians. Historians and Vatican experts say they have never seen anything quite like this level of open hostility and personal insults between a sitting president and the head of the Catholic Church. Polls tell a troubling story regarding public confidence. A recent survey showed that only a minority of Americans now believe the president is mentally sharp enough to handle major crises, a significant drop from just a few years ago. Another poll found that nearly half of the population believes he is simply too old to serve effectively. Even more concerning is the growing perception that he has become increasingly erratic with age. These numbers are not coming only from political opponents. Some former allies and even members of the inner circle have begun expressing quiet doubts. Lawmakers have gone further, formally requesting an evaluation of cognitive health, citing signs of cognitive decline and increasingly incoherent public statements. We must ask the uncomfortable question: is the man directing this high-stakes confrontation fully in control of his faculties? Defenders insist that the unpredictable style is deliberate, part of a brilliant maximum pressure strategy meant to keep enemies off balance. But critics see something different: a leader whose impulsiveness and lack of strategic consistency are creating unnecessary chaos on the global stage. The contrast with Iran could not be starker. While the White House trades barbs with the Vatican and faces mounting questions about age and stability, Iranian leadership has projected calm resolve. The Islamic Republic has maintained strong internal unity despite the pressure. Various political and social groups have rallied around the central government. There are no signs of the mass unrest that some foreign policy planners had predicted. Iranian military commanders speak with discipline and clarity, openly admitting they have not yet used their full arsenal and promising new tactics that will surprise their adversaries. This measured confidence stands in sharp opposition to the bombastic and often contradictory rhetoric coming from Washington. The fact that a sitting president is now feuding publicly with the spiritual leader of over 1 billion Catholics, while simultaneously managing a naval blockade that risks global economic shock, raises serious concerns about priorities and judgment. After all the tough talk and dramatic declarations, how is this much celebrated naval blockade actually working on the ground, or rather, at sea? According to official statements from Central Command, the results look impressive at first glance. In the initial day, no ships managed to break through the American cordon, and several commercial vessels were forced to turn back. Forces claim they are enforcing the blockade without bias against any nation. Pentagon officials have repeatedly emphasized that the operation is running smoothly and that 90% of Iran's economy, which depends on sea trade, has been effectively paralyzed. But we must look beyond the press releases to examine the real consequences, and they tell a very different story. The first and most obvious problem is that this blockade is not just hurting Iran.